A peanut sat on the railroad track, waiting for its supper. Along came a choo-choo train. Choo-choo peanut butter. Shut up, you cook. Greetings, salutations, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Devin, and welcome to a tutorial on Dialog. Now, first off, thank you to 123 Packard Bell for putting in a request for this. Now, what he requested was a simple dialogue system. Now, this isn't as much as a tutorial as much as it's a showing, because doing a tutorial on a dialogue engine, at least one that I would find acceptable, there's just way too much work involved. There's a lot that goes into a good dialogue engine. So I did the next best thing. What I did was I built an extension for you guys to use. You can do whatever you want with it. And I'm just going to show you how to use it, because it is super simple to use. Now, first off, everything starts with... let's open up the controller dialog. This doesn't come with the engine, but this is like, if you're using it in your game, you're going to want a controller for it, obviously. The first thing that we do is we declare our dialog globals script, which this is what makes this engine really nice. You don't have to declare everything on a case-by-case basis. You can set defaults. So here we have a whole bunch of defaults, and it's all pretty self-explanatory. You got the XX, the YY, which, by the way, for the X and Y values are adhered to the view. I would like to expand this extension in the future so that you can choose whether or not they're hooked to the view. But until then, you're pretty much stuck to the view. Although you can change that if you want, and I'll show you where to make that change. This here is pretty important. In order to actually utilize. Moving to the next page, you gotta designate a key or use this set this global variable. Whether or not this global variable is true or false is when when it moves on from one page to the next. So, that's your oh my goodness, I need that. So that's your dialog globals, and then you got the dialog add script, which is your bread and butter with this entire engine. Now, as you can see, all you really need is the text. That's it. This actually utilizes every single possible argument that is allowed with the script, which is 16, I believe. But they're all optional. The rest gets filled in by the globals, wherever that may be. So right now, portrait is just nothing. But you could have a default portrait be something like a question mark, or whatever works for you. A portrait index, which is the index of the sprite of wherever the portrait is. So you can have a single sprite hold all the expressions of a character. Sound effect, we'll get into that later. You can set the font, you can set the speed. So say someone's dying, you can make it so they talk really slow. The X and Y coordinates of that particular speech bubble, the width, the height. The padding, which is the distance between the words and the portrait, or the edges of the text box. Color 1 and color 2, I honestly forget which is which. I think color 2 is the color of the back, or color 1 is the color of the back. Color 2 is the color of the font. Color 3 and color 4 are not necessarily used by default, but you can set them to be used. And then rotation. And the script fires up the dialog engine, displays text onto the screen. Put in the begin step or create event only. Actually, you know what? This doesn't really matter anymore, so we can actually just get rid of that. But anyways, so first off, we have a bunch of keys, which by default are put into the global portraits. Or put in the use the global values, and then it checks the arguments. If the argument values do not equal -1, then it puts the argument value into that key. Now, what this means is that say you wanted to designate a sound, but you did not want to designate a portrait or portrait index. Instead of trying to figure out what the heck the default is, you can just type in -1, -1, and it will ignore them. So that's very important information, knowing that you can skip over arguments just by typing in -1. So if instance exists, obj underscore dialog box. Basically, it's checking to see if the dialog box already exists. If it does not, it creates it, sets a variable. And if it does exist, it just sets the existing object to a variable. Array height is the array height of the dialog box. This is for queuing the scripts, essentially. And then what you got now is a for loop that checks various keys in the dialog box. What this does is it makes sure that the same dialog is not entered multiple times. Like, say you put the script into the step event. This makes sure that you don't end up with 60 copies of the same dialog per second to add to the queue. That's bad. So if it has the exact same text, exact same dialogue, and exact same dialogue index. So there are still options for putting similar things, just not the exact same things. Very important. And then once all that passes, and then with the dialog object, it just goes ahead and adds all these values to a two-dimensional array. And then it returns the array index for that dialog. So if you want to refer back to that specific dialog later and change values, you can do so. So that's that script for you. Now next is pretty much the dialog engine itself, which, oh, by the way, include with the engine, in case you forget anything, is this little example object with all sorts of awesome information on how it's used and whatnot. And so definitely check that out. Now, the object dialog box. This is where all the magic happens. So, create event, we just initiate some variables. A little note here. Do not add this object manually. It will break things. You know, it's only meant to be initiated by the script. Instance destroy, just some surface cleanup. This does use surfaces. Step, we set up our key variables. I'm sure this looks familiar to you. There's a variable in the object called index, and that basically says what page or what dialog it's on, which is all stored in this two-dimensional array, but then passed on to these variables here for just to make things nice and simple. Gather value for portrait space. So it gets the sprite width of the portrait, so it's able to make the space on the dialog for the character portrait. This is important for the text. You definitely need to know the max length, how long it is. So that's done. This is used for a lot of processing reasons. Key underscore activate. This is for moving the text faster or going to the next page. This is your speed, and speed double is just speed times 2. So if you hold down the key activate button, the text actually goes faster, and it's equal to your base speed times 2. Text length and font size they're just also used for calculations. Add breaks to the text. Now what this does, I spent almost 2 weeks getting this code just right. So what this does is it takes your text and it automatically adds breaks to it. So the max length, say, is 250 pixels. It will count out line per line. Okay, this line goes up to okay, this word extends past 260 pixels. It will then count back to the nearest space, cut out that space, and add in a line break instead. And then it will just go ahead and continue with all the text from there. Without this before, it would count the word out still until it hit max, and then it will break the word down, and it just simply looked very ugly. So this block of code here fixes that. Add letters over time. This is the text process. There's 2 variables that hold your text. One is text, which is just the raw text, no breaks. And then there's text process, which has breaks. As you can see, we're putting that into the print variable. The print variable is what is actually put up onto the screen. And then this is for the audio. I'll show you the audio here in a bit. Destroy self. There's a variable in the object called destroy self. If it's set to true, it starts deducting the alpha. And once the alpha is completely deducted down to 0, the instance destroys itself. Render text box in text. This is mostly drawn onto a surface. You can think of this area between surface set target and surface reset target as a draw event, basically, within a step event. This is a chunk of code that I highly recommend that you play with, because utilizing this chunk of code, you can completely customize what your text box looks like. So play around with this. You can see right here, color 0. That is essentially your first color that you entered in, which, yeah, it looks like it's the dialogue background. And then color 1 is the font, but you got 2 more colors that you can play with. So by all means, and of course you can manually enter colors. Like there's nothing stopping you from drawing C_black, but if you want things to be dynamic, you have that option. So that's that for you. And then room end, just some more surface cleanup. And then draw end, very important, draw end, so that things remain adhered to the view correctly. Now this is where you can change things. As you can see, we got view_xView plus surface X, view_YSView plus surface X. That is what adheres the dialog box to the view. If you really don't want this, you can just delete that and use only surface_X. So that's how that works. You don't need it, or if you don't need it, that's how you remove it. And that's pretty much the engine. There's one more thing I do want to show you though, and that is the sound. The sound is actually I find the sound to be very exciting. You can add, oh, whoops, got another space there. But you can add voices or voice sound effects more accurately to the dialogue. So we're going to give Happy Harry a voice. And I picked out a sweet little sound effect for his voice. If you ever played a little game like Golden Sun, a little game called Golden Sun on the Game Boy Advance, you'll know exactly what I mean as far as dialogue voices. So check this out. And, of course, Grumpy Graham doesn't need a voice because he's grumpy. No one likes Grumpy Graham. But, yeah, so there you go. We create a simple little sound effect for Happy Harry. And it's amply randomized, too. I'll pull up that chunk of code for you to look at. It randomizes the... I opened the wrong object. My goodness. It randomizes the... when it plays between 2 to 4 steps. And what that does, it create, instead of it being static, like just sound like a robot basically, it disperses it out the play a little bit, makes it sound more organic, like someone is actually, as if a bunch of beeps actually sounds like someone actually speaking, but you know what I mean. But so yeah, there you go. That's the dialogue engine. Let me show you how this works though. It is an extension. If you've never worked with extensions before, you are going to get an object or a file, and you would right-click on extensions and then import extension. I'll just go ahead and hop over to my extensions folder here. I'm actually in the process of moving all my systems over to extensions because, oh my goodness, they're awesome. But anyways, dialogue. So this is the dialogue engine right here. This is what you're going to get. You're going to go ahead and click import, although it's already in, so I don't need to import it. And then you're going to get this file here in your tree. You will then go to the Import Resources tab and then Import All. And it will add the objects and scripts that I just showed you to whatever project you open it up in. And then you'll be able to put them to use and do whatever you want with them. Anyways, I guess that's pretty much it. Thank you for the request, Packard Bell. Hopefully this helps you out and helps out anybody else who needs a decent little dialogue engine. I did not look much into alternatives. I'm sure there's some pretty good ones out there, too, that you can play around with. But other than that, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching, and happy gaming.